I'm pleased to show you the CODESYS Test Manager in the next minutes. My name is Roland Wagner. I'm responsible for the product marketing at 3S. First step, I will give you a short introduction. Why to test, why to use test automation, and how to do that into CODESYS. And then we will see how the CODESYS Test Manager is integrated in that CODESYS Development System. And at the end, we will have a short summary. Okay, now let's start. The first step, why should we test our IEC 61131 application software? Well, this is a very ridiculous question. Of course, we need to test it in order to make sure that the application is running as we have expected and programmed it. Now we can do that manually, but with the CODESYS Test Manager, you have now a possibility to make a test automation. And this makes sense under certain conditions. For example, in case you have to carry out your test frequently, because, for example, you have to continuously provide a basic functionality during the development phase of your machine. Or because there's a software module that is developed and maintained on a long-term basis, and perhaps after 2 years, when you see there is an update necessary, you want to test it once again and do not want to do it manually, but by means of such an automation test tool. There's another use case. So-called unit tests can be generated. This means that there might be external tools which generate test code, which are then available for a special program POU, function block function, so that you can immediately execute such a test, which is then automatically run through and giving the right results. On the other hand, a test automation does not make sense in case the above-mentioned issues do not apply, or if you have just very small and very complex applications. Yeah, so for example, I will show you later on a small example of a garage door program. Of course, I could easily test that manually, and I will show that how to do so. But in case I have to do that more often, then it might make sense to prepare a test automation suite or a test script for that task, and then this work is done automatically at any time I want to do it. Example for automated tests of control software. As already mentioned, we can check function blocks, programs, or functions by preparing inputs for that POUs and check the results with the expected values. We can do that with POUs that we have in our application, but we can as well do that with library functions for which we don't have the source code. So the source code is not necessary. We just fill in the inputs, receive the outputs, check the expected outputs with the real outputs, and then we can check whether the behavior is as we have expected and used it. Then we can use the test manager for frequently used application parts in order to simulate IOs or to test the real machine, to make a real regression test or a system test on a machine side. So this is now the case for the application engineers, but even device manufacturers, original equipment manufacturers, can use the test manager in order to test their entire control system. So they can find out if the controller, the PLC, has the right behavior, for example, after restart, whether they can use breakpoint, stepping, whether the monitoring of variables on the controller works properly, or whether system functions work as expected. Now, what are the benefits of an integrated test tool? Of course, we could have an external tool. We'll discuss that in a minute. But the benefits of an integrated test tool are, of course, obvious. You have the same operating philosophy, one working directly inside the CODESYS Development System. You have the access to the same database for the software to be tested. So the application or the POU that you want to be tested is in the same environment and in the same database. You do not need to install a certain database access. Then you might even have the test development in the same project as the application. And of course, with the CODESYS Development System, such an automated and integrated test tool is always available. Now, what are the alternatives? As already mentioned, you could use external test tools. There are, of course, lots of tools for C, C++, C# programming, but so far we do not really know if there's an IC 61131 compatible external test tool available. So therefore, you might be perhaps forced to use the CODESYS Test Manager. But of course, you can at any time use manual tests with the advantage that you have everything under your hand, under your fingers, with the disadvantage that manual tests are, of course, somehow boring and not very convenient. Now let's get an overview to some definitions and the functionality. When we talk about the CODESYS Test Manager, then we talk about an integrated plugin to the CODESYS Development System, which acts at first step as a manager, as an administration tool, and as an interpreter for test scripts. A test script itself is now a set of test cases, which means there are a lot of test cases, a lot of test actions inside such a test script, and all of them are saved together as one test script into a so-called test repository. The test case is now a possibility to structure several test actions, and the test actions are then the programmed commands, which the test manager executes when the script is executed. Now the test development is the phase, is the work we have to do in order to prepare such a test script. The CODESYS Test Manager provides a comfortable dialogue, or several comfortable dialogues for the easy handling of such test scripts and test cases and test actions. Last but not least, we will have a so-called test report after the test script was executed. This is a generated report that shows all the results of the executed test scripts. So this was just a little bit theory. Now we will continue with some practical work. I have some screenshots prepared, but rather than showing screenshots, I will switch directly to CODESYS in order to show you the test manager in a live way, a live mode. At first step, we need to install the CODESYS Test Manager, as this plugin is not available in the standard setup. Now, where do we get it from? This is a very easy question. It's available in the so-called CODESYS store. And you see in the CODESYS taskbar, you have here an icon, and you can click on it. And then as soon as your PC is connected to the internet, a CODESYS store is opened. You can manually find it in the category engineering and then search for it, or in case this takes too long for you, of course there's a search function. Now here we have it, just to show that, Test Manager. You find all the keywords matching. There's as well another tool, but we see here that there are two different options. The full version of the CODESYS Test Manager, which costs €1,500, and there's a for free demo version of the CODESYS Test Manager. Now there's one thing you need to know. In order to use one of those options of those products, you will need a so-called CODESYS security key. This is a USB dongle, which is needed as well for the free of charge demo version. This is necessary for us in order to have a good protection of the functionality of the CODESYS Test Manager, just to mention that. Now if I click in into the product, I see the description, now in German. You can of course switch to English, get a datasheet license agreement, and as soon as we are registered into the CODESYS store, we can immediately download the product. So for the download, there is no necessary. I just can download and install it. And you see that now the installation is running. Of course, in my case, I can skip it because I have already pre-installed it for you, so you don't need to wait for the installation. But you see, with that integrated CODESYS store, the installation of the plugin is very easy. It takes just a few minutes, and you don't need to save it somewhere on the hard disk and then find the package for it, but just install it directly. Now, in the so-called Tools and Package Manager, we have now the possibility to open the available packages. Unfortunately, I forgot to switch back to English. I had a German webinar just a few hours ago, but we see nevertheless that the CODESYS Test Manager is already available here. And you see here in the package manager that there is a new version available. So due to the internet connection, the CODESYS store tells me already that I could download the latest version of it, or I could, with the CODESYS package manager, directly install the test manager as well, in case I had it not directly in the CODESYS Development System, but to a file system, and then bring it to my PC where I want to use it. So this is as well possible, of course. Okay, now let's close it because I have it already installed. As soon as I have it installed, I will find under Tools a new option, the CODESYS Test Manager. I can open that right now, and then we see the first step, a new tree. Depending on your personal preferences, you can of course push that docking view somewhere else, on the right side for example, or you could put it as I like it here on the left side in that tree view. Let's take a closer look to it. At first step, we can choose the test repository. Remember, the test repository is a kind of database for the test scripts. So we see here below that there are some test scripts prepared, and they are all now saved in the default test repository. And I can click on it and edit the settings. So the default test repository is here on the hard disk, and I could now easily add or remove such repositories in order to have special repositories for special tests. By the way, in case you have further on tests which you might modify, it's always a good idea to keep the test scripts for certain test reports and do not touch them, because then later on you know what you have done. Remember that the test development is somehow similar to a programming development, so therefore it might make sense to save the different states of the test scripts. Now I want to show you a very simple example which somebody of you might already have seen. It's a simple garage door controller, and I just log in order to show you how this works. So I use my soft PLC here running on my PC. And as soon as I start it, there's even a so-called target visualization opened. We just close that and rather take a visualization in the CODESYS Development System in here in order to be able to see what is happening. That first step, I could test my application just by means of the inputs and outputs. In this case, I have all the inputs and outputs available in a global variable list. So for example, there's a Boolean variable called operate door, and if I switch this to true, then we see in the visualization and here in the variables that the garage door is moving, that the light is on, and that due to a certain condition that it will be the sensor detected that we are at the low position of the garage door. And of course I have to can redo that, and then we're working the other way around. Now this is a very easy and possible way to test the application. In my case, there are some further things included. For example, in case there is an overload or there is something happening with the garage door so that the door opening or closing process is not reached in time, then there is a failure detected. Of course, I can immediately test that as well manually. But you see here with my visualization, this is of course one step easier than doing it on the variable side, because I can see something and prepare a visual test for it. Nevertheless, the test automation is even more comfortable in case I have to redo and rework that test more often. Now in order to do so, I open now the test script garage that you see here. Now let's take a closer look at it. I've already prepared several so-called test cases. Let's go to the script name. I can of course change the name here, give it a version, an author, and so on. And then I can, with right mouse click, add test cases. I'm sorry, I forgot really to switch that to English, and perhaps Perhaps I restart that CODESYS version in order to be able to show it in English. And now I can open my test script and have all the menus and commands in English as expected. Okay, so I could, for example, add another test case, give it a name, and here, my new test case. Click on it and add an action below it. See, it takes a second, but then the new name is taken. Let's say, for example, press button. And then I can choose a command in such a test action, what CODESYS should do right now. You see that the commands are in two different categories. One category is the real category in which I want to access a command. So we see here, for example, that I can access to device information, file I/O, libraries, monitoring, objects, online projects, and so on. In this case, I want to take the monitoring category. Now, within the monitoring category, I have now the option, for example, to write a variable. I can take a variable directly out of my tree here, for example, out of device, application, and then I take the global variable list simulation signals, and here I take operator, the variable we just took a second before manually. Okay, and then we add another test action, and in this case we want to check the light of the garage door and see whether it has turned to true when the button was pressed. So I go to the monitoring category once again and compare a variable. Now, being lazy, I just copy the tree in here, delete the operator variable, and now take the variable light instead. I enter a certain timeout, and I compare time. Of course, it could be equal, but it could be smaller, greater than, greater, equal, and so on, or in a certain range. In this case, it just should be true. Okay, now we have realized that whole application. I can now log in. By the way, typically you would have a test case which prepares the test. Preparing would mean that you load the application, that you would close another one, would set the gateway and the device properly, and then you would log in. In my case, I've just made it quick and dirty. Okay, I need to, of course, search my network once again and find the right controller. So now download my application. So this was not prepared within the test script, so I do that manually. But again, this is something you could provide within the test script, and you will find examples how to do so as well as soon as you have installed the package. Okay, now I'll start the whole thing. And then, instead of manually testing, by the way, we could open both the visualization and the global variable list again. Now, by clicking on the test script, right mouse click, I could now execute that script. And then all the tests that I've done before manually will now be done automatically by the script. First of all, I have to enter my name as the tester, so this is coming from my PC. Okay, that's correct. And then you see here is already something done, the visualization is working, and there's a new window opened with the test progress. In this window, I could immediately stop the test script, or I could auto-collapse all the test cases, or would have activated here auto-scroll, so in case there are more test cases, I'm always on the latest one here and can follow what is happening. And you see that I'm not operating at all. Everything is done automatically by the test script, which I have prepared before, and it took me just a few minutes to prepare that in the right way. So it's comparatively easy to prepare that. And you see it's very quickly working, because as soon as there is a result coming back from the soft PLC, which was expected, then the next action is executed. Okay. Now, here we are. Everything is correct. And you see that my last action, which I manually added to press the button, caused, after the test was working, even to close the door once again. So now we can have a look at the test report, which was automatically opened with a complete green bar, which means there were no errors during the test execution. And I can now have a closer look on all the test cases which were executed, and they were all succeeded in this case. And I can now save all the reports here in my test manager. You see, this is the test report I've just received from the test manager. I can save that. So directly inside my saved reports. Also, this is the one I've saved in the morning. This is the one I saved in the afternoon. So all are available right now. Okay. And then I could as well save it as an HTML file in order to be able to give it to somebody else, or to document, to print it out, whatever you want to do it with it. Now this is the way how to work at first step with the CODESYS Test Manager. Just to repeat a little bit, here with the screenshots, we have the test actions, which are represented by that flashlights. We have all the commands. By the way, I didn't show that in detail. In addition to the test commands, you have some extended settings, which are then interesting in case you have some failures. For example, you can execute even a command even if there was a previous failure. You can have even a condition for it. You can have retries, initial delays. You can ignore even failures, cancel tests on run on failures, so you immediately stop the whole test script in case there was a failure for that test action, and so on. A lot of additional conditions you may configure in order to make your tests really very effective. Yeah, we have seen the test scripts. We have seen the test repository. Yeah, this is how it is integrated. Now we have seen how you can integrate the plugin via the CODESYS store. Just download and install it, or manually install it in case you have saved it somewhere on a USB drive or on a hard drive via the package manager. And then the package is available here. Again, you need a so-called CODESYS security key in order to save the license on. You see that there are two different types available, a very small one which is meant to be remaining on the computer, and a bigger one which is a real key, which you probably have here on your, together with your car key, for example, in order to be able to go to a workstation and enable then the functions that you need. You see here, in case you have a valid license, this will be displayed. Now we've seen the first steps. Start the test manager under Tools. Select the default repository, but in fact you do not need to do so because this is already pre-done and prepared for you. Yeah, and then you can generate your test script by means of that comfortable editor, as we've seen it. Okay, just a repetition of the most important commands for application developers. You can access on devices by selecting a gateway, a controller, selecting the IP address. You can open projects, close them, save them. You can have online commands, start, stop, reset. What we have seen are the monitoring commands, read, write, compare value. You can even add further information to the test report by certain commands, for example, the version of the application, the version of the CODESYS Development System, and other things that are generated by that system. Then you can even create, delete, or change objects in the test project. So you can, for example, insert some POUs that might be interesting for a certain test condition or that are generated. And you can save outputs to a file system on the PC where the test manager is installed. You can add and delete libraries in case you want to have a certain test bed condition. You have timing options, and even you can execute Python scripts You remember perhaps that CODESYS has an integrated Python script interface, so you can directly execute Python commands for which you can as well use some test automation. But of course, they are not that convenient as we have it here in the CODESYS Test Manager. Yeah, and then we've seen that we can execute the tests by clicking on Save and Run here, or as I've done it on the test, where was it? On the test script here, and with right mouse click I can then execute the test script. Then I receive the test report. During the test there will be the test progress window, and yeah, we can export the results as XML and HTML. Okay, now this was the standard tests. You see that we have now two different possibilities to test: the standard tests, as we've just seen them, and the so-called unit tests. Just a short repetition on some properties of standard tests. All the scripts all the script functions that we have now executed were executed by the CODESYS Development System by the means of the monitoring interface. So this means this would work like I manually executed write value, compare value, and other commands. So this means that the test application is not running cyclic consistent to the application code. Nevertheless, the application code itself is running on the PLC, on the controller. In my case, it was a PC, but in typical cases, you would not take a PC, but any dedicated modular or compact PLC or a drive PLC or whatever you want to test with. Furthermore, with the standard tests, the tests themselves are remaining into the test repository. So they are not project dependent, but tool dependent. So if I close the project, my test script will remain available within the test repository. On the other hand, if I receive a test project, or a project that should be tested, I do not receive automatically the test code for it. So therefore, I need the test repository, which could, of course, be zipped together and sent to somebody who wants to test it, but nevertheless, there are two separated locations for it. Now let's switch to the right side. The CODESYS Test Manager supports the so-called unit tests. Now, these unit tests are as well executed directly on the controller, but the code for them are generated or programmed within the IC 61131 languages. So typically in structured text, for example. So this means we now add special POUs that are only containing test codes. Now, how can we distinguish between application code and test code? This is done by a so-called pragma attribute test. We will see that in a minute. So this means that the CODESYS Test Manager checks all the POUs available and only calls those for the test which are marked by this pragma as test project. This is now then executed during runtime of the application. So both the test T and the test code are both running in the same cyclic operational way. So they are cyclic consistently working. Furthermore, each module in a test case is stored within the project. You have the application code and the test code within one project, and it's then easier to spread or to send somebody else that complete code consisting of application code and test code. Now, all this sounds very complicated, therefore let's go one step further and see how such a test code could look like. So we see at first step here that in the declaration part there's a pragma attribute test. So this means this pragma, the PU is only used for the test manager, and it's then in the real life of the machine no longer executed and inserted. What are the benefits for such unit tests? Yeah, at first step, the test code can be generated and maintained along with the application. Further on, the tests are also written in IC 61131. For those of you who are really hardcore programmers, this is much more convenient because you are very quickly accessing to all the variables, so you don't need to bother around with dialogues and so on, even if they're very comfortable, but they take longer than programming in structured text. And the most important benefit is that the execution of the test code is in real time, cyclic, consistently together with the application code. So the administration is done directly in the project, and they're only used by the test manager. There are some recommendations: collect tests in a folder, or even better, move tests into a test library. These are just for better handling. So you might have a library with test code, then you can easily include it into the project or separate it from the project. So this is something which is really of a vital importance for safety-related software, for IC 61508 SIL 2 or SIL 3 safety integrity level 2 or 3. Now let's take a look how this could look in practice. I have prepared a simple project which in fact does nothing, but just tests a library function which is included in the library manager. It's just a standard library which is the counted down, up, down function within the standard library. And you see there are two different implementations available, the so-called full implementation. At the first step, we see that in the declaration part, we have that attributes test. So this is obvious that this POU is only for testing. And you see that there are further pragmas. With one I can define the test name, test case name of it. With another one, I can put it into a certain test category. Now let's go further down into the declaration part. Then we see that there are var inputs and var outputs. And these are now the interface to the test manager. So this means that the CODESYS Test Manager expects these inputs, X execute and X abort, and it expects these outputs, X busy, X done, X error, X aborted. These are the interface to the test manager in order to be able to start the test with X execute or to abort it, and to get the results of the test back. For example, the test is in progress, it's busy, or it's finished, it's done, or there was an error, X error, or it was manually aborted by the tester. Now going down to the code part, I can now, by means of these special interface variables, realize my code. I could, for example, call that counter, test it, give the results back, so X busy is false when it's finished, and X error is false, and so on until I have reached the end. Then it's somewhere true, X done is true, or X error is true in case there was an error. Now this is the classical way to use it. There's a more convenient way for those of you who are familiar with object-oriented programming. There's a certain common behavior module with a certain library which we could just use. There is a common behavior model library, CIA behavior model, and in case I use that, I can now reduce my effort because I can now inherit a lot of work. And you see I just, with that means of that super command, I just inherit and execute code that I have inherited, and I just need to care for the cyclic execution of the testing within that private cyclic action method, for example. The same thing is done for private starts, reset outputs, and import. So in fact, it's the same thing, but the handling of the interface variables, X error, X busy, and so on, is done by means of that behavior model library. Okay. We can, of course, as well take a look how this is executed. First steps, we take a look at the test script. Now this is very short. In this case, it just consists of two different entries. The first test case is prepare, and I just log in here. In order to be able to do so, I just need to prepare the right software PLC for it. Okay. And then it's logging in. And there's another, let's call it test case. In fact, it's not a test case, it's a test command or a test option to search for unit tests and to execute them. And in case this command is available here. The test manager automatically goes through the whole project, searches for POUs that are marked by that pragma, that attributes test, and then executes this test. So let's start it. So again, we receive the test progress window. Again, this is in German because it was another window, but I think you can transfer that as well into English language because the results we will see are anyway the same, no matter if they are in German or English. Okay. In the meanwhile, we can have a short look here on the devices tree. You see that this has changed. This is a little bit magic. The fact is that the original application was put into a backup part because for the test we have modified the application. So we've seen the report was proper, everything worked properly. Let's take a look at the PLC PRG. Perhaps you remember that this was very simple, almost nothing inside. Then let's go to the modified one. Then we see that there are a lot of implicitly entered calls available right now. The calls are for the code that was generated for different things in here. So this is automatically done by the test manager, and as soon as my test is proper and working, I should remove that part here, rename back up to application again or to whatever my application name is, and then I'm finished, and then I can delete things which are not necessary anymore. Okay, so these are the unit tests. Now let's come to the new feature, unit tests with test tables. This is a brand new feature which was introduced some weeks ago with the latest version of the CODESYS Test Manager. So for those of you who have already purchased it, you can just benefit by updating your CODESYS Test Manager. And those of you who have not bought it so far, just buy the latest version and you will have that new test table included as a new functionality. Now what it is used for? It's for tabular definitions of test cases for unit tests, and therefore there is a new object, a separated object introduced, the test table editor. It makes it much more easy to configure the unit tests, and out of that test table there is a generated test code available as soon as we start the test manager. But I will show you that right now. Again, I have a new object here, and we close that. I have a very simple project. Again, my PLC PRG just has a cycle counter, and there is an instance of a very simple function block which does nothing different than adding the three values which are available as input and calculating the sum and the product for it. I want to test that, and I go, for example, to my POU tree and add a new object, the test table, which is available here. Now the test table, at first step, asks me to enter a name, my test table, for example, and then I can select a testee. When I click on that input assistance buttons, then I can choose that function block, or I could choose one of the library. Then I can check which inputs and outputs are available within the testee. So you see here are the inputs, and I choose all of them, and the outputs, and choose all of them, and add them now to the test table. Now I have a new test table, and I can immediately test it. Standard values, just as the name of the test case, and then I can insert standard values to the inputs of the testee of that function block. Now, you've seen that for the sum, we've just the sum of these three inputs, so the result will be simple. It should be 1 plus 2 plus 3 is equal to 6, and the product will be the same. 1 times 2 times 3 is as well 6. So I can immediately put that inside, and then I take a second step, and let's take some higher numbers. Oops. Now 10 plus 10 plus 100 should give a result of 120 and a product of 10,000. By the way, you see here, in case it's not necessary that the result is very accurate, then I can even have a tolerance, or I can even react on the test in case that the test was not proper. Then I could skip that test, or skip the test group, skip the whole unit test, or skip the whole test manager script execution at all. For this case, it's very simple. Now we take a third value. So the sum should be 110, and the product should be, of course, 0. Now we can immediately execute the application. So just log in to my soft PLC and start it, and then I can execute that script here. So let's see what happens. The test progress window is opened, everything is calculated, and everything was successful. So this was now very easy to create such a unit test. And as before, again, we here get a copy of the original application. As before, we have as well some instrumented test code. And as before, there are some POUs automatically generated due to the fact that there are test tables inside. So for every test case we have in here, there are some new objects now generated automatically by the tool. So therefore, it's much, much faster and easier to realize such unit tests. Okay, let's now come to the end of the presentation. We see here just once again the conclusion of the test tables. We can, of course, as well export, import test specifications in XML. And one thing which is interesting, there is another, oops, this one, not this one, this one here. There's another example available for which we have already some test code. Instead of having a simple and one-time execution for a test case, we can as well have a multiple time. So in this case, when there's 100 inside, so instead of simple, we can have cyclic. I can add the number of times that such a step should be repeated. And you see that instead of having a fixed value, you could even add something like switching from true to false in case it's a Boolean variable. Or I can even react on a rising edge, falling edge, monotonously rising or falling edges, and so on. Or I could even have certain time duration for a command that is executed. Okay, then let's summarize the presentation right now. The CODESYS Test Manager is a part of the CODESYS Professional Developer Edition, which is made for professional software developers who want to be able to work similar to high-level programming tools like C# or C++, for example, Microsoft Visual Studio. Some other tools available for UML, subversion integration, static analysis, profiling. By the way, this is already released, so no more in development. And one part is here the CODESYS Test Manager. It's for generating, executing, and evaluating test scripts. It's fully integrated, and the only tool that is fully integrated into an IC 6731 programming environment. It's for automation of complex tests. And yeah, to be honest, we've developed that CODESYS Test Manager at first step for our own purposes. So today we use the CODESYS Test Manager since 5, 6, 7 years in order to test the tool itself, to generate values and see what is realized, the compilers are working properly, and so on. So it's a really proven tool, and we use it for every release of Service Pack, at least for 50,000 test cases. So this means in sum there are 100,000 test actions that are executed by means of the Test Manager. So for application developers, it's a perfect tool for testing their POUs, libraries, and applications. and for device manufacturers is a very useful help in order to test their devices and their device-specific libraries. Just once again to repeat it, you receive the CODESYS Test Manager in the CODESYS store. The system requirements are CODESYS version 3.5, Service Pack 2, or of course higher, and you need CODESYS security key as storage for the licenses. The full license fee is 1,500 euro. Now you might think this is very expensive. Okay, this may be your opinion, but at first step, think how many work is put into that tool in one step. But this is another topic. But on the other hand, please be aware how many effort you can save in case you have automated tests. Yeah? This is perhaps 1-2 days of manual testing, and then you have that 1,500 euro already spent. And even much more in case you have let's say, a bad tested application software, and then on-site at the machine builder or the machine operator you have some problems due to a bad tested software, then the effort for fixing that problems on-site are much, much higher, much more expensive. So therefore, it's a good investment for such a real automated testing, because it really makes the software quality of your application code much, much better. So now I'm at the end of the presentation. I thank you for the attention. Thank you and bye-bye.